No one expected humans to lead the combat training, until they did part. 1. First contact and integration. Captain Susan Miller stood at the viewing window of the transport ship, watching as the massive space station grew larger. The Celestial Bastion was unlike anything humans had ever built, a sprawling structure with curved sections that looked like flowing water frozen in space. Lights blinked across its surface, and ships of various shapes and sizes moved around it like busy insects. Impressive, isn't it? Lieutenant Alan Fisher moved to stand beside her. His dark uniform matched hers, both displaying the newly created patch of Earth alongside the 7-pointed star of the Galactic Concord. Bigger than they said, Susan replied, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Hard to believe we're actually here. It had been only 8 months since the ships appeared in Earth's orbit. The aliens called themselves the Galactic Concord, 7 different species who had formed an alliance centuries ago. They came in peace, offering technology and knowledge in exchange for joining their coalition as the 8th member race. What surprised everyone was why they wanted humans, not for Earth's resources or strategic location, but because humans were, in their words, uniquely adaptive. The aliens had observed humanity for decades, fascinated by their resilience and creativity. The real shock came when the Concord requested military advisors. Susan and her team, Alan, security specialist Olivia Grant, and combat engineer Kevin Jones, were chosen from Earth's best combat instructors. 10 minutes to docking, came the announcement over the speakers. Kevin joined them at the window, his broad shoulders tensed with excitement. I still can't believe they have ships that can cross 20 light years in 3 weeks. Do you realize how much this changes everything we know about physics? I'm more interested in their weapon systems, Olivia said, joining the group. Her dark eyes scanned the station critically. Notice how few obvious defense turrets there are for something they call a bastion? Susan had noticed the same thing. For a military headquarters, the station seemed strangely unprotected. But maybe their defenses were just not visible to human eyes. The docking process went smoothly. When the airlock doors opened, Susan led her team into the station. The air smelled different, clean but with an undertone of something like cinnamon. Waiting for them was a delegation of aliens. At the front stood Admiral Xerix, a tall insect-like being with 4 arms and a head that reminded Susan of a praying mantis. His outer shell was a deep blue color that seemed to shift in the light. Captain Miller, Xerix's voice came through their translation devices with a slight buzz. Welcome to Celestial Bastion. We are pleased Earth has sent its specialists to join our defense forces. Susan stepped forward and gave the greeting they had been taught, right hand open at chest level. Admiral Xerix, we are honored to represent Earth in the Concord. Behind Xerix stood representatives of the other species. The Volari were bird-like, with bright feathers and graceful movements. The Neth looked almost human except for their skin, which sparkled like diamonds under the lights. The Krell were massive, gray-skinned giants with small eyes. The Mira floated rather than walked, their bodies semi-transparent. The Teln had 6 legs and bodies covered in soft fur. The Jexid were the smallest, with large eyes and thin limbs that moved with incredible speed. They were shown to their quarters, spacious rooms that adjusted to Earth-normal gravity and atmosphere. Susan had barely unpacked when her communication device beeped. Captain Miller, Admiral Xerix requests your presence at the training facilities, said a computerized voice. The training area was enormous, taking up several levels of the station. Susan was impressed by the technology. Simulation chambers that could create any environment, weapon ranges with targets that moved in complex patterns, and exercise areas designed to accommodate the different physiologies of all 7 species. As you can see, our facilities are quite advanced, Admiral Xerix said as he led them through the space. Our forces train primarily through simulations and controlled exercises. Susan noticed something strange. Despite the impressive equipment, there was a sterile quality to the training. The alien soldiers moved through their exercises with precision, but seemed to lack intensity. How often do your troops engage in live combat drills? She asked. Xerix's head tilted in confusion. Live combat? You mean actual physical confrontation? Very rarely. Most of our training is theoretical or virtual. Susan exchanged looks with her team. On Earth, combat training was intensely physical, designed to prepare soldiers for the chaos and strain of real battle. Admiral, may I ask when the Concorde last engaged in actual combat? Susan kept her tone respectful. The Concorde has maintained peace for 73 Earth years, Xerix replied with obvious pride. Minor skirmishes occur occasionally with non-member species, but nothing requiring full military response. Later, in a private meeting with her team, Susan voiced her concerns. They've forgotten what real combat feels like, she said. All this technology is impressive, but their soldiers don't know what it's like when plans fall apart and you have to adapt instantly. Did you notice how they train each species separately? Olivia added. They're not leveraging their diversity. Kevin nodded. And their engineers focus on maintaining systems, not improvising when things break. We need to observe more before making suggestions, Susan cautioned. We're guests here, and we need to understand their methods fully. Over the next 2 weeks, the humans watched and learned. They studied each species' strengths and weaknesses. The Volari had incredible vision and agility in the air. The Neth could withstand extreme temperatures. The Krell possessed tremendous strength. The Mira could pass through solid objects for short periods. The Talon had enhanced hearing and smell. The Jexid could process information at astonishing speeds. What became increasingly clear was that none of these advantages were being used effectively in combined operations. During a simulation exercise, Susan watched as a conquered unit failed to adapt when their primary systems were disabled. Their perfect formations fell apart and communication broke down. After the exercise, Admiral Xerix approached her. You seem troubled, Captain Miller. Susan hesitated, then decided honesty was best. Admiral, your troops are skilled with their technology, but they don't appear prepared for unexpected situations. Our simulations cover thousands of scenarios, Xerix replied. With respect, Admiral, real combat rarely follows scenarios. It's chaotic and unpredictable. And humans are experts in chaos, are they not? There was something like amusement in Xerix's voice. We've had a long history of conflict, Susan admitted. It's not something we're proud of, but it has taught us to adapt quickly when things go wrong. Xerix studied her for a moment. Our combat training program has grown predictable and stagnant, I will admit. Perhaps you have suggestions? Susan began to outline some basic changes, but Xerix raised a hand to stop her. You are too new to understand the complexities of interstellar defense protocols, Captain. Observe for now. In time, your input may be valuable. Susan nodded respectfully, but as she rejoined her team, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Concord's military was untested and vulnerable. Their technology was impressive, but technology alone didn't win battles. What none of them knew was how soon that vulnerability would be exposed, and how quickly the aliens would need to learn humanity's way of fighting. No one expected humans to lead the combat training until they did part 2. The emergence of a new enemy. 3 months passed quickly for Susan and her team aboard the Celestial Bastion. They had settled into a routine, observing the training methods of the Concorde forces and offering small suggestions when asked. Most of these suggestions were politely acknowledged and then ignored. It was early morning by station time when the alarm sounded, a pulsing tone that echoed through every corridor. Susan was in the middle of her daily exercise routine when her communication device lit up with an urgent message. All military advisors report to Command Center immediately. When Susan arrived, the Command Center was in chaos. Aliens of all 7 species moved quickly between stations, their voices raised in concern. Admiral Xerix stood at the central platform, his forearms moving across multiple control panels. Captain Miller, he called when he saw her. Join us. Susan and her team gathered around the large holographic display in the center of the room. It showed a small outpost on the edge of conquered space, or what remained of it. Buildings were in ruins and fires burned across the settlement. Outpost Zeta-12 was attacked 6 hours ago, Xerix explained, his voice tight. 300 colonists, primarily Teln and Neth. We lost contact suddenly and sent a scout ship. This is what they found. Survivors? Susan asked. Very few. The attack was swift and targeted. Defense systems were disabled first, then communications. Do we know who did this? Alan asked. Admiral Xerix manipulated the display, bringing up grainy images of sleek, dark ships. We have only partial sensor readings, but the attackers appear to be Shral, a species from the neighboring Vedran cluster. We have had limited contact with them in the past, always peaceful. Not anymore, Olivia muttered. The command center fell silent as a new message came in. Another outpost was under attack. The next few days were tense. 2 more settlements fell with minimal resistance. The Concord Council met in emergency session, and Susan's team was invited to observe. The council chamber was a vast room with seats arranged in a circle. Representatives from all 7 species sat according to their status, with Admiral Xerix taking a central position. The 3rd settlement has fallen, announced a Volari counselor, her bright feathers dulled with stress. Our forces were overwhelmed in less than 2 hours. How is this possible? Demanded a Neth representative, his crystalline skin flashing with anger. Our defensive technology is superior to anything the Shral possess. Superior technology means nothing without proper implementation, said a Krell counselor, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. Our military response has been by the book, Admiral Xerix defended. All units followed standard protocols, and yet 3 settlements are destroyed, the Neth counselor shot back. As the argument continued, Susan noticed something important. The conquered leaders were shocked not just by the attacks, but by their inability to respond effectively. They had relied on their technology and protocols for so long that they didn't know how to adapt when those failed. A frustrated Jexid counselor finally looked around the room. Does anyone have any ideas besides the standard response protocols? Those clearly aren't working. Without planning to, Susan found herself standing. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Captain Miller? Admiral Xerix seemed surprised. You wish to speak? Yes, Admiral, Susan said, keeping her voice steady. I believe my team may have a suggestion. The human advisors have been here only 3 months, a Volari counselor said dismissively. What could they possibly offer in this situation? A fresh perspective, Susan replied. From what we've observed, the Shral are using tactics that don't match your training scenarios. They're adapting their attacks based on your responses, exploiting the predictability of your protocols. The council members exchanged looks. And what do you suggest? Admiral Xerix asked. Let humans take over combat training, Susan said boldly. Our species has thousands of years of experience with conflict. We know how to prepare for the unexpected, how to adapt when plans fail, and how to think like an enemy. The chamber erupted in dismissive laughter. The idea that the newest, least technologically advanced species would lead training seemed absurd to most. Captain Miller, said a Mira counselor, her translucent form shimmering with amusement. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but combat in space is vastly different from the ground wars of Earth. The principles remain the same, Susan insisted. Surprise, adaptation, psychological resilience. Your forces are technically skilled but lack real combat experience. I have reviewed Earth's military history, a Tellan counselor said, his fur bristling. It is barbaric and primitive. Sometimes primitive works, Kevin spoke up from beside Susan. The Shral are using unconventional tactics because they know your conventional responses. We need to surprise them. The debate grew heated until Admiral Xerix raised all 4 of his hands for silence. We cannot dismiss any option at this point, he said gravely. More lives are at stake. He turned to Susan. Captain Miller, what specifically would you change about our training? Susan took a deep breath. Everything. Your forces train in specialties, but real combat requires flexibility. Your simulations are too clean and predictable. Real battles are messy. Your species, trained separately, but your unique abilities could be devastating if combined correctly. She gestured to her team. Lieutenant Fisher is an expert in small unit tactics. Specialist Grant can teach psychological resilience, how to function when systems fail. Engineer Jones can show your people how to improvise with technology. The BR room was quiet as the council considered her words. This is absurd, the Neth counselor finally said. We cannot entrust our defense to humans. 1 week, Susan proposed. Give us 1 week with a group of your soldiers. Let us demonstrate our methods. Admiral Zarek studied her for a long moment. Susan knew he was taking a risk even considering her proposal. Finally, he nodded. 1 week, he agreed. You will have access to training facilities and a company of troops from various species. After 7 days, you will demonstrate the results to this council. As Susan and her team left the chamber, Alan whispered, Are you sure about this? We've never trained aliens before. No, Susan admitted quietly. But their current methods aren't working, and people are dying. We have to try something different. Olivia smiled grimly. Well, we wanted to make a difference in the Concord. Looks like we got our chance. Kevin clapped his hands together. I already have ideas for improvised weapons training. These aliens are about to learn how humans fight. As they walked back to their quarters to plan, Susan felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. They had 1 week to revolutionize alien combat training and prove that humans had something valuable to offer the Galactic Concord. No one expected humans to lead the combat training until they did Part 3, the human method. This is not what I expected, said a Volari soldier named Cree. His bright blue feathers ruffled in disapproval as he looked around the large, empty cargo bay that Susan's team had converted into a training area. Susan understood his concern. Instead of the high-tech simulation chambers the aliens were used to, the humans had created something that looked primitive by comparison. Obstacle courses made from cargo containers, hand-to-hand combat rings marked with tape on the floor, target ranges with physical objects instead of holographic projections. Where are the simulation systems? Asked a Neth soldier, his crystalline skin reflecting the lights above. We won't be using them, Susan replied firmly. At least not at first. 50 soldiers from all 7 species stood in loose groups, clearly uncomfortable with the unfamiliar setting. Susan could tell they were skeptical, and why wouldn't they be? To them, humans were the newest, least advanced species in the Concord. Before we begin, Susan said, standing on a platform to address them all, I need you to understand something important. The Shral are winning because they don't fight the way you expect. Our job is to prepare you for the unexpected. She pointed to her team members, who stood ready at different stations around the bay. Lieutenant Fisher will teach small unit tactics, how different species can work together and use their unique abilities. Specialist Grant will focus on psychological training, how to function when technology fails. Engineer Jones will show you how to improvise with whatever tools you have available. A Krell soldier nearly twice Susan's height stepped forward. Our species have natural advantages your kind does not possess. Why should we listen to humans? Susan didn't back down. Because while you have better technology and natural abilities, humans have something you lack. Experience with chaos. We've spent our history fighting and adapting. Now we're going to teach you how. She nodded to Alan, who activated a control panel. Suddenly, the lights in the bay dimmed and a piercing alarm sounded. Without warning, cold water sprayed from ceiling pipes, and smoke machines filled parts of the room with thick fog. The alien soldiers reacted with confusion. The Volari tried to fly above the chaos but found the ceiling fans activated, creating turbulence. The Neth, usually coordinated, bumped into each other in the low visibility. The Mira tried to phase through obstacles but discovered electric field generators that disrupted their abilities. This, Susan shouted over the noise, is what real combat feels like. Disorienting, uncomfortable. Nothing works quite the way you expect. After a minute, Alan restored normal conditions. The alien soldiers looked stunned, some angry, others intrigued. That was uncivilized, said a Jexid soldier, shaking water from his thin limbs. Combat isn't civilized, Olivia replied. The Shral certainly aren't being civilized when they attack your outposts. Over the next few days, Susan's team pushed the alien soldiers beyond their comfort zones. Alan split them into mixed species squads, forcing them to learn each other's strengths and compensate for weaknesses. A typical squad might include a Volari for aerial reconnaissance, a Krell for heavy lifting, a Jexid for rapid information processing, and others filling specialized roles. Olivia's psychological training proved the most difficult for many. The concept of functioning without technology was almost incomprehensible to species that had relied on advanced systems for generations. "What if your translator fails?" she challenged a group of mixed species. "How will you communicate?" "We would request a replacement unit," answered a Tellan soldier. "And if no replacement is available? If you're cut off from supply lines?" The aliens had no answer. Olivia began teaching them simple hand signals and basic sounds that could be recognized across species barriers. Primitive but effective communication methods that didn't rely on technology. Kevin focused on teaching improvisation, how to repurpose everyday objects into tools or weapons. He showed how a food tray could become a shield, how common chemicals could create smoke screens, how to disable an enemy ship with minimal resources. "Your technology is amazing," he told them. "But it's also predictable. The Shral know what systems you use and how to counter them. We need to surprise them." By the fourth day, Susan saw signs of progress. The mixed squads were beginning to work together effectively. During one exercise, a Krell soldier lifted a Jexid teammate to a high position, allowing the smaller alien to use his superior vision and processing speed to coordinate the others through a complex obstacle course. In another breakthrough, AI T-side, Mira soldier discovered she could phase partially through a wall while still holding physical weapons, a technique no one had thought possible before. Admiral Xerix visited on the fifth day to observe their progress. He watched silently as the alien troops navigated a combat scenario that simulated a Shral attack on a conquered outpost. The soldiers used minimal technology, relying instead on coordination, improvisation, and quick thinking. "Impressive," Xerix admitted afterward. "They move differently, more unpredictable." "That's the point," Susan explained. "The Shral expect your forces to follow standard protocols. These soldiers won't do that anymore." "But can they work with our technology?" Xerix asked. "We cannot abandon our advanced systems entirely." "We're not suggesting you do," Susan replied. "Tomorrow we'll integrate technology back into the training, but now they'll use it differently, as a tool, not a crutch." On the sixth day, as promised, Susan's team introduced technology back into the exercises. But now when systems failed or were disabled, which the humans made sure happened regularly, the soldiers adapted instead of freezing or retreating. By the final day, they were ready for the demonstration before the council. The cargo bay had been transformed into a simulated battleground, with observers watching from a protected gallery above. The scenario was challenging, a Shral attack on a Concord station with multiple system failures and unexpected variables. The mixed species squad entered the scenario using standard Concord tactics, but when Susan triggered a cascade of system failures, they smoothly transitioned to human-taught methods. The Volari soldiers created aerial distractions while Krell, heavy units provided cover. Neth troops, usually reliant on targeting computers, accurately fired weapons manually. When communications went down, the soldiers used hand signals and sounds to coordinate. Most impressively, when faced with a sealed door that couldn't be breached with standard equipment, a Tellan engineer used techniques learned from Kevin to create an improvised explosive from available materials. The demonstration ended with the squad successfully repelling the simulated Shral attack with minimal casualties, a stark contrast to the real-world failures the Concord had experienced. In the EI's silence that followed, Susan looked up at the council members. Their expressions ranged from shock to grudging respect. Admiral Xerix stepped forward. "It seems," he said slowly, "that we have underestimated both the human approach to combat and its potential value to the Concord." A Mira counselor floated, closer to the railing. "These methods are unorthodox, even disturbing by our standards, but they appear effective." "Effectiveness is what matters now," Xerix replied. He turned to Susan. "Captain Miller, the council will need to deliberate, but I believe your demonstration speaks for itself. You and your team have shown us something valuable. As the council members filed out, Susan's team gathered around her. "Do you think they'll actually implement the training fleet-wide?" Alan asked. "They'd be fools not to," Olivia said. Kevin grinned. "Did you see that improvised explosive the Teln created? I almost cried with pride." Susan watched as the alien soldiers they had trained talked excitedly among themselves, barriers between species seemingly forgotten in their shared accomplishment. "I think," she said quietly, "we've started something important here. Not just new combat methods, but a new way for these species to work together." Little did any of them know how soon their training would be put to the ultimate test, or how much more humanity would come to mean to the Galactic Conquered. No one expected humans to lead the combat training, until they did. Part 4. The Counteroffensive. 2 days after the demonstration, Susan was summoned to Admiral Xerx's private office. The room was sparsely decorated, with star charts covering one wall and various medals and honors displayed on another. "Captain Miller," Xerx said as she entered, "the council has reached a decision." Susan stood at attention, preparing herself for either outcome. The past week had been intense, and while the demonstration had gone well, she knew many council members still had reservations about human methods. "You have been appointed Combat Training Director for all Concord forces," Xerx announced. Susan blinked in surprise. "Director? Not just an advisor? The council believes the situation requires decisive action. Your methods, while unconventional, show promise." Xerx's mandible parts clicked together, the equivalent of a human frown. "Not all members agree, but the majority recognize the need for change. Thank you, Admiral. I won't let you down." "There is more," Xerx continued. "Your team members have also been assigned leadership roles. Lieutenant Fisher will oversee tactical operations. Specialist Grant will lead psychological training. Engineer Jones will head a new division focusing on improvised technologies." Susan felt a surge of pride, but it was quickly tempered by the weight of responsibility. They were the first humans to hold leadership positions in the Concord. "The appointments are already causing controversy," Xerx warned. "Several member species have formally protested, citing humanity's violent history as evidence of unsuitability for leadership." "Our history is precisely why we're qualified," Susan replied. "We've made every mistake possible in warfare and learned from them all." "I am beginning to understand that," Xerx said. "Now, we must move quickly. Intelligence suggests the Shral are planning a major offensive against the Helios colony." Susan recognized the name. Helios was one of the Concord's core worlds, home to millions of civilians from multiple species. "How much time do we have?" 2 weeks, perhaps less. You will need to implement your training methods across our fleet." "That's not enough time for comprehensive training," Susan said, thinking fast. "We'll need to focus on key units first and create a simplified program others can follow quickly." Xerx nodded. "Do what you must, Director Miller. The Concord is counting on you." The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Susan's team worked around the clock, creating training programs and distributing them throughout the Concord fleet. They focused on 3 core principles: mixed species coordination, psychological resilience, and technological improvisation. Not everyone embraced the changes. Some veteran officers resisted, particularly among the Volari and Neth, who considered the human methods beneath their dignity. Others, especially the practical Krell and quick-thinking Jexid, adapted more readily. Kevin made a breakthrough when he identified a weakness in Shral technology. "Their ships are built for aquatic-based thinking," he explained during a strategy session. "Their blind spots reflect their evolutionary development in water." "Meaning?" asked a Teln commander. "They protect against threats from all sides equally, but their sensor coverage above and below their ships is weaker. They think three-dimensionally, but with a bias toward horizontal movement." This insight led to a new approach for Conquered ships, attacking from steep vertical angles to exploit these blind spots. The warning came sooner than expected. Just 12 days after Susan's appointment, long-range sensors detected a Shral fleet approaching Helios colony. 30 attack ships, far more than in previous engagements. "They're escalating," Xerx said grimly as the Conquered leadership gathered in the war room. This is not a raid, it's an invasion. How many ships can we deploy? To defend Helios, Susan asked. 22 combat vessels plus the colony's defense platforms, answered a Mira commander named Shimmer. Not enough for a conventional defense, Alan said, studying the tactical display. Then we won't fight conventionally, Susan decided. The next hours were spent developing a battle plan unlike anything the Conquered had used before. Instead of the standard formation and protocol-based responses, they created a flexible approach that leveraged the unique abilities of each species and incorporated the human training. When the Shral fleet arrived at Helios, they faced something very different from previous encounters. The Conquered ships did not form their usual defensive pattern. Instead, they split into mixed species task forces, each operating semi-independently with specific objectives. Valeri-piloted fast attack craft darted in from unexpected angles, targeting the Shral blind spots Kevin had identified. Krell heavy cruisers absorbed damage that would have crippled other ships, drawing fire away from more vulnerable vessels. Neth precision gunners, now trained to fire manually when needed, hit critical systems with shocking accuracy. The battle was still brutal. 3 Concord ships were destroyed in the initial engagement, and several more took heavy damage. But for the first time, the Shral suffered significant losses as well. Their formations broke as they tried to adapt to the unpredictable Concord. Tactics. Susan coordinated from the command ship, working closely with Admiral Xerix. When standard communications were jammed by the Shral, the Conquered forces switched seamlessly to alternative methods, using light signals and encrypted burst transmissions developed by Kevin's engineering team. The turning point came when a combined strike force of Jexid and Mira ships executed a U-1000 daring attack on the Shral flagship. The Jexid vessels created a diversion while Mira troops, using their phasing abilities, infiltrated the Shral ship and disabled its main weapons. After 4 hours of intense fighting, the remaining Shral ships retreated. The colony was saved, though the cost had been high. In the aftermath, Susan walked through the medical bay of the command ship, visiting wounded soldiers from all 7 species. Their injuries were serious, but their spirits were surprisingly high. "We fought like humans today," a wounded Krell soldier told her proudly. "We adapted," Susan smiled, but the comment made her think. They hadn't actually fought like humans, they had fought like a unique combination of all 8 species, each contributing their strengths in new ways. Later, in the debriefing with Conquered leadership, the mood was cautiously optimistic. "This victory is significant," Admiral Xerix said. "For the first time, we have pushed the Shral back with minimal civilian casualties." "The human methods proved effective," admitted a Valeri commander who had been one of the strongest critics, particularly the mixed species units and adaptive tactics. "This is only the beginning," Susan cautioned. "The Shral will learn from this defeat. They'll adapt their approach next time. And we will adapt again," Kevin said confidently. "That's the core of the human method, constant evolution." As the meeting concluded, a message arrived from the Conquered High Council. They had unanimously voted to expand Susan's authority, making her training program standard across all Conquered forces. Outside the conference room, Susan found Alan staring out a viewport at the stars. "Quite a day," he said as she joined him. "First humans to command alien forces in battle. First victory against the Shral." "I keep thinking about what that Krell soldier said," Susan replied. "About fighting like humans. But that's not really what happened, is it?" Alan shook his head. "No. We gave them our experience with adaptation and chaos, but they combined it with their own strengths. Something entirely new. Something better," Susan said softly. "I think that's why we're really here. Not just to teach, but to learn and create something neither humans nor the Conquered could develop alone." As they looked out at the stars, Susan felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she had experienced before. Humanity had found its place in the Galactic Conquered, not just as the newest member species, but as catalysts for change when it was needed most. The Shral War was far from over, but today had shown that together, the 8 species could face whatever came next. No one expected humans to lead the combat training, until they did Part 5. A new era of cooperation. 1 year had passed since the battle at Helios Colony. In that time, the Galactic Concord had transformed its approach to defense and combat training. What began as a desperate measure had evolved into a new standard that combined the best of human adaptability with alien technologies and abilities. Susan stood at the main viewing platform of Earth's new Interspecies Combat Academy. The sprawling facility stretched across a valley in what was once called Colorado. Training grounds designed for each species' unique abilities dotted the landscape, alongside mixed environments that forced cooperation and adaptation. "Director, Miller," a voice called from behind her. Susan turned to see Admiral Xerix approaching, his blue carapace now decorated with additional honor markings. "Admiral," she greeted him with a smile. "How do you like Earth so far?" "It is more variable than I expected," Xerix replied, looking out at the mountains surrounding the valley. "The rapid changes in weather and terrain make it an ideal training environment. That's why we chose this location," Susan explained. "Recruits need to experience unpredictability. Over the past year, the tide of the conflict with the Shral had turned dramatically. After their defeat at Helios, the Shral had launched several more major offensives, each met with increasingly effective Concord resistance. 3 months ago, the last Shral forces had been pushed back beyond Concord space, and a tense ceasefire now held. "The first graduates complete their training tomorrow," Xerix noted. "Over 2,000 officers from all 8 species." Susan nodded proudly. The academy had been her idea, a permanent installation on Earth where military personnel from throughout the Concord could train together using the combined human-alien methods that had proven so successful. Across the valley, she could see the various training exercises in progress. Volari aerial teams practiced high-speed maneuvers with human pilots. Krell heavy units worked alongside Neth precision specialists. Jexid information officers coordinated with Teln scouts and Mira infiltration teams. "I received the latest technology transfer approvals this morning," Xerix said. "The Council has authorized sharing of Level 8 propulsion systems and advanced shield technology with Earth." This was another major development. In exchange for human combat expertise, the Concord had begun sharing technologies that advanced Earth's capabilities by centuries. New medical treatments had already eliminated several deadly diseases, and energy production had been revolutionized. "That's excellent news," Susan replied. "Our engineers are eager to begin integration with Earth's defense systems." They walked together along the platform, watching a mixed team of human and alien recruits navigate a particularly challenging obstacle course. The cooperation between species was seamless now, with each leveraging their natural strengths and compensating for others' weaknesses. "Have you seen Kevin's latest project?" Susan asked. Xerix's mandibles clicked in what Susan now recognized as amusement. "The adaptive ship interface? Yes, quite revolutionary. Combining Jexid processing speed with human intuitive control systems was inspired." Kevin had flourished in his role as head of the new Improvised Technologies Division. His teams had created dozens of innovations that blended Concord technology with human creativity. Alan and Olivia had been equally successful, with their training methods now standard throughout the fleet. As they reached the end of the platform, Susan spotted a group of visitors being led on a tour, representatives from the Shral. After Kiar, the ceasefire tentative diplomatic relations had been established. These Shral diplomats had requested to observe the academy, perhaps recognizing that understanding their former enemies' methods was the first step toward lasting peace. "They still make me nervous," Xerix admitted quietly. "We lost many good soldiers to their attacks. Change takes time," Susan replied. "A year ago, most of the conquered species were skeptical of humans. Now we work together as equals." Xerix nodded thoughtfully. "More than equals in some ways. The Council is considering human candidates for several key leadership positions beyond military training." This was news to Susan. "Really? I thought there was still resistance to humans in civilian roles." "Less each day. Your species has proven its value, not just in combat, but in adaptability and innovation. These are qualities the Concord needs as we expand. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement summoning all senior staff to the main auditorium. The Academy's opening ceremony would begin in 1 hour, with representatives from all 8 species in attendance. As Susan and Xerix made their way to the auditorium, they passed training rooms where human instructors worked with alien students on various skills. In one room, Olivia was teaching psychological resilience techniques to a group of Neth officers. In another, Alan ran a tactical simulation with a mixed species command team. The auditorium was filled with dignitaries when they arrived. Susan took her place on the stage alongside other Concord leaders, feeling a sense of pride as she looked out at the diverse audience. Humans sat side by side with aliens of all 7 species, no longer separated by suspicion or doubt. Admiral Xerix stepped to the podium to deliver the opening address. His speech was brief but powerful, acknowledging the journey that had brought them to this point. "The universe is unpredictable and often dangerous," he said toward the end of his remarks. "While we hope to have outgrown the need for warriors, we now understand that peace requires protectors who understand conflict. Our human allies have taught us that preparation for war is sometimes the surest path to lasting peace." As applause filled the auditorium, Susan looked over at her team members seated in the front row. They had come a long way from their first days on the Celestial Bastion, uncertain of their place in the Concord. After the ceremony, Susan walked alone to a quiet spot on the Academy grounds. From there, she could see Earth's moon rising above the mountains. Soon, according to the latest agreements, a joint human Concord base would be established there. She thought about humanity's long history of conflict. For thousands of years, humans had fought each other, developing combat skills through bitter necessity. Now, those same skills were being used not to destroy, but to protect a community of species spanning dozens of star systems. A Jexid cadet approached, stopping at a respectful distance. "Director Miller, the graduation rehearsal is beginning." Susan smiled. "Thank you, I'll be right there." As she walked back toward the main buildings, she passed a memorial recently erected to honor those lost in the Shral conflict. Names from all 8 species were engraved there, a testament to their shared sacrifice. No one had expected humans to lead the Concord's combat training. No one had anticipated that Earth's violent history would become its greatest contribution to interstellar peace. Yet here they were, building something new together, a future where the strengths of each species created something greater than any could achieve alone. Tomorrow, the first graduates would return to their posts throughout Concord space, taking with them not just new skills but a new understanding of what was possible when different species worked together. And Susan knew this was just the beginning of humanity's journey among the stars.